Imagine this. You're just drifting off to sleep, and then bam! A sound so loud, so sudden it feels like a bomb just detonated inside your skull. That terrifying experience actually has a name: exploding head syndrome. Now, I know it sounds like something straight out of a horror movie, but believe it or not, it's a real and surprisingly common medical mystery. So let's get into what's really going on.
So, let me ask you, have you ever been right on the edge of sleep and suddenly you're blasted awake by a huge crash, maybe a gunshot or a massive explosion, but it wasn't real? No one else heard a thing. If you're nodding along right now, you are definitely not alone. You might be one of millions who've had this exact bizarre experience.
I mean, just listen to that quote, "a bomb exploding inside my cranium." Wow. That really just captures the sheer intensity, doesn't it? We're not talking about some faint little noise in the distance. For people who go through this, it feels completely 100% real and shockingly violent. It's like an internal cataclysm happening right between your ears.
But here's the twist, and honestly, it's the single most important thing to understand. Despite that terrifying name and the absolutely intense experience, exploding head syndrome, we'll just call it EHS, is medically benign. It's harmless. It's a sensory glitch in the system, not something dangerous. Now, it's completely painless, but the shock and the fear it causes, oh yeah, that is absolutely real.
So, what is it actually like to have one of these so-called explosions inside your head? Let's dive a little deeper into the specifics of this really, really strange sensory event.
Yeah, the word explosion is really just the beginning. I mean, look at this variety. People report hearing everything from gunshots and slamming doors to massive thunderclaps. Some people even hear something as specific as a guitar string snapping or a loud electrical buzz. It's almost like the brain has this whole library of sudden, shocking sound effects that it can just decide to play at random. It's wild.
And a lot of the time, it goes way beyond just a sound. For many people, an EHS episode is a full-body, multi-sensory event. So, along with that huge noise, they might see a flash of light, or feel this weird electrical jolt run through their body. And of course, they wake up with their heart just pounding out of their chest, thrown into an immediate state of panic and distress. And this right here, this gets to the real problem with EHS. The event itself might be physically harmless, but the psychological fallout is a whole other story. People start to become afraid of falling asleep. They're constantly bracing for that next explosion. This creates this awful, vicious cycle of anxiety and insomnia, which, get this, can actually make the episodes happen more often.
Now, you might be thinking this is some modern thing, right? A product of our high-stress, always-on lives. Well, you'd be wrong. Turns out, people have been reporting these bizarre sensory shocks for centuries, long before they had a name for it.
This timeline really puts it all in perspective. The earliest clear description we can find goes all the way back to 1619, from the philosopher René Descartes of all people. He wrote about a sharp and shattering noise and seeing sparkling lights. Fast forward over 250 years, and a neurologist named Silas Weir Mitchell perfectly described them as sensory shocks. It actually wasn't until 1989 that we got the super dramatic name exploding head syndrome. And more recently, experts have suggested maybe calling it episodic cranial sensory shock, which, okay, is a lot less terrifying.
Okay, so what is actually happening inside our brains to cause something so dramatic? Let's get into the leading theory, which is pretty fascinating.
All right, so the leading hypothesis is basically a misfiring circuit. Think of your brain like a huge, complex power grid that's shutting down for the night. There's a part of your brain called the reticular formation. It's kind of like the main on-off switch. As it starts powering things down for sleep, whoops, there's a glitch. Instead of a nice, smooth shutdown, a whole group of auditory neurons suddenly fires off this massive burst of energy. Your brain, trying to make sense of this internal power surge, does the only thing it can. It interprets it as an incredibly loud noise from the outside world.
Of course, the first thing anyone thinks is, oh my God, am I having a stroke? So let's clear this up, because this is really important. The biggest difference is pain. Exploding head syndrome is completely painless. A thunderclap headache, on the other hand, which can be a sign of something very serious, is famous for causing the worst headache of your life. And unlike nocturnal seizures, where you might not remember what happened, with EHS, your memory of that crazy loud noise is crystal clear.
For the longest time, the thinking was that EHS was some super rare condition that mostly affected older women. Well, modern research has totally flipped that idea on its head. Forget rare. Recent studies are now estimating that a pretty staggering 10 to 15% of the general population has experienced this at least once in their lives. Just think about that for a second. That's not a rare disorder. That's tens of millions of people who've had an explosion in their head.
And if you thought that was high, get this. One study that looked at female university students found that over 37% had experienced it. This points to a really powerful link between EHS and periods of high stress and bad sleep, which, let's be real, is a pretty perfect description of life at university. So this really builds on that last point. EHS doesn't just happen out of nowhere. It's strongly linked with things like insomnia, high levels of stress, and anxiety. It also has this really interesting connection with another strange sleep phenomenon, sleep paralysis, which suggests they might share some of the same wiring in the brain. And it's also worth noting it can sometimes be triggered by withdrawal from certain types of antidepressant medication. So, the big question is, if this happens to you, what do you do about it? Well, the good news is that managing it is often surprisingly simple and incredibly effective. And this right here, is the single most powerful takeaway. The #1 treatment for exploding head syndrome isn't a pill or some complicated procedure, it's knowledge. It's understanding. For so many people, just getting a diagnosis, having a name for what's happening, and having a doctor reassure them that it's a benign, harmless glitch, that's enough. That reassurance reduces the anxiety, which in turn reduces how often the episodes happen. In a way, education is the cure. So how does that reassurance translate into a real-world strategy? Well, the focus is all on lifestyle. Improving what's called sleep hygiene. Having a consistent bedtime, making your room dark and quiet. That's key. Managing stress with things like meditation can also help calm the whole nervous system down. And for people with really bad insomnia, there's a specialized therapy called CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, that can be a total game changer for both the sleep problems and the EHS that comes with it.
Now sure, medications do exist for very severe, persistent cases, but they are rarely the first move. The focus is almost always on these behavioral and psychological strategies first, because for the vast majority of people, they work beautifully, and there are no side effects.
So in the end, exploding head syndrome is so much more than just a scary-sounding name. It's a harmless little glitch that actually gives us this fascinating peek under the hood at the incredibly complex, delicate process our brain goes through every single night when it shuts down. It's a great reminder that even in those quiet moments when we're falling asleep, our brains are just full of mysteries. Makes you wonder, what other secrets are hiding in that journey from wakefulness to sleep?